Hi, Michael Sung from Machination Studio, once again with another short video explaining the decisions that went into the design for the Warring States Cavalry kit for Wargames Atlantic. The Warring States period was the last period in Chinese history to have a large reliance on heavy chariots, right? First introduced during the Shang and later Zhou dynasties. By the end of the Warring States period, the heavy infantry, much like elsewhere in the world at the time, started to be the dominant unit type in the armies. This was also before cavalry became a major arm in the armies of that period. A major reason that I covered in the previous video was that the horses were not very big. But cavalry did exist. We have evidence straight in Qin Shi Huang's terracotta army. We have gone over the size and the type of horse in the previous chariot video. By looking at the terracotta sculptures, we can make a conjecture that there were armored cavalrymen with and without shoulder pads. And based on the figures that stood in front of the horses, we can also conclude that there were unarmored cavalrymen as well. The armored figures have shorter coats of lamella that do not extend past the waist, right? It makes a lot of sense. And from the variety of headdresses, we can also conclude that these figures with horses were not just representing officers and commanders. It is harder to come to a conclusion about the weapons they carry, right? The figures in the terracotta army actually held real weapons, and over time the wooden spear halves disintegrated, and during the archaeological dig, the locations of surviving bronze parts were not matched with the locations of the figures. However, we can look into this later Han Dynasty find for clues. These are Han Dynasty bronze statues. They're not life-size, right? So after watching Qin Shi Huang cripple his empire to make the terracotta army, the later Han emperors decided that, small-scale model soldiers will have to do. You can see that these horses are the same design as the flying horse of Gansu, which makes these the Fergana horses. These sculptures were sculpted after Zhang Qian opened the trade routes to Central Asia and imported these larger horses. But most importantly, these slender weapons survive, right? They are dagger axes, clearly. But these are the Han Dynasty designs, which combine the dagger axe head with the spear tip into a single piece of bronze or steel. I think it is safe to conclude that the earlier Warring States cavalry could very well also have had dagger axe polearms. So now we move away from the Qing to another of the Warring States, the Zhao state in the north, and to one of their notable rulers, Zhao Wuling Wang. Leaders of the broken up Warring States had retained the hereditary titles they held from the Zhou dynasty, right? Like Gong, dukes, and Hou, marquis. And Zhao Wuling was the first to break away from that tradition and declare himself king, Wang, in 323 BC. He was also notable for the Hufu Qishe military reform, which he led in 307 BC. Hufu means dressing like the Hu, and Qishe means riding and shooting, right? Horse archery. Being the northernmost state, he was occupying the Ordos region and had been fighting the Donghu people for a long time, right? The Hu is a generalized term to mean others, right? Often translated as barbarians. These Donghu, eastern barbarians, were horsemen from the steppe, later to be referred to as Xiongnu by the Qing and the Han dynasty. These are very broad terms to encompass a large number of people, right? Terms like similar to how the Romans refer to the Celts or the Scythians. They could mean one tribe, or they could mean many, many different tribes of people. So this reform to dress and fight like the foreigners was quite radical, because the Chinese of the time differentiated themselves from the outsiders not just along ethnic lines, but also along cultural lifestyles. If you lived in a fortress city and farmed grain and you traded, you were part of their culture. If you are a nomad living in the steppe and herding animals, you were the outsiders. He faced a lot of opposition for this reform, and in the end, Zhao Wuling starved to death in a siege while he harbored his elder son Zhao Zhang, who had staged a coup against his younger son and heir Zhao He. If the former king starved to death in a siege, you can bet that everyone else probably did as well. So we know that the Zhao state cavalry dressed like the Hu at one stage. But what did the Donghu of the Warring States period look like, right? There's actually very little physical evidence. We have this sculpture of a Xiongnu during the later Han dynasty, but we have to use a bit of conjecture to try to figure out how the Warring States period, the Donghu, would look like. And to make that conjecture, I'm going to the other side of the planet. In these reliefs carved during Xerxes' reign in Persia, many subjects of the Persian Empire are shown. Among them is the Saka Homavarga from the extreme east of the empire. Next door neighbors to the people north of the Yellow River, right? The Donghu or the later Xiongnu. Is it such a huge leap suggesting that the Donghu might dress like the Saka Homavarga? Especially when the Han and Mongols, who come from the same region, wear similar caps at a later point in history. It is for this same reason that I included Scythian-style axes and pickaxes into the kit. Similar pickaxes existed in Chinese history going back to the Shang dynasty and across the Asian steppe. What fascinates me the most about the Donghu and the Xiongnu is that the occupation of the Ordos region by the Zhao state, and later the Qing dynasty, and subsequent invasions into Xiongnu lands by Qin Shi Huang's top general Meng Tian in 215 BC eventually forced the Xiongnu to form a grand coalition of tribes. And that later haunted the Han dynasty for over a century. So with this kit, you can build a Warring States cavalryman or a plausible Donghu or Xiongnu horseman with a variety of plausible weapons. Enjoy. Thank you.